let me talk about another dynamic of the Democratic Party that Robert Reich so eloquently laid out in his piece today on Huffington Post, discussing who lost the white working class. I was counting on somebody. Somebody don't let me down. You know, you had Robert Krugman, Krugman, however you pronounce it, and you had Ta-Nehisi Coates, you know, let me down. So I was like, come on, Robert Reich, he's got to say something. He didn't address this issue of the issue of reparations at all. But he did start unpacking the question of why so many so many working class white Americans have migrated away from the Democratic Party over the years, but more the stark contrast with this year in their support of Donald Trump. And so he makes the case for one, it's a twofold case that he makes in the Huffington Post piece, which I think you should read, definitely read. And I'll have the name next time, but thanks so much to the person who shared this to me on Twitter just before the show. I had just enough time to read it. So twofold argument is that one, there is the contingency of white working middle class Americans who left the Democratic Party because of racism, right? We saw that definitely in the 60s with Governor George C. Wallace, and you know, how he was a Democrat, and with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965, we saw a mass exodus of white working class people. But that really doesn't speak as much to why the working class is still out, right? Why they've stayed out. And he begins to unpack in this article about the Democratic Party ultimately losing their way in terms of their relationship with Wall Street, in terms of their relationship with the labor unions, in terms of their relationship with free trade, and the expense that their newfound policies has cost the average working American, particularly white in this case. And so he begins to unpack the scenario of promises made and not kept by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. He recalled the time that he was in office with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton made a campaign promise for the labor unions and intentionally ignored it after the fact, once he was in office, not willing to expend one dime of political capital on keeping his campaign promise to labor unions. And we saw a decline in membership underneath of labor union membership underneath Bill Clinton from 22% all the way down to 12% today because of some of those policies that he decided not to act on. Same thing with President Obama, promises made, promises not kept that would have benefited directly the working class. White working class, yes, but the working class across the board. And so he's really making the case that the Democratic establishment has lost its way. And a lot of people get mad when you discuss the Democratic Party in terms of being a part of the establishment, but you're just getting mad with the truth, right? The Democratic Party today is really more subservient to or more beholden to Wall Street than they are labor unions. Is there anyone who's going to debate that and willing to debate it statistically? No, there's not. They answer more to Wall Street than they do labor unions. And that's number one. They answer more to Wall Street than they do the average American. And so there's this obsession that Robert Reich talks about with this middle class, this unicorn of a demographic that the Democrats believed were independent, and they felt like it was a class, the soccer mom class is what he calls it, the soccer mom class, and the class of people who have enough wealth and enough investments in Wall Street that they now need to be catered to specifically over the concerns of labor unions and over the concerns of the working class. And Reich considers this almost like a figment of their imagination that they chased after to the detriment of their own base. Now, I would argue that that 1964 transition, where we saw a lot of the white working class, that mass exodus from the Democratic Party because of race issues. I believe that contingency and that vein of thought is still here. And that's why they are overwhelmingly going over to not the Republican Party, but Donald Trump, right? So Donald Trump feeds on this exact scenario, on this exact demographic, rather. He feeds on the fact that they feel disenfranchised, they feel left out, they are struggling economically, such that there's the Nobel Prize winning couple who wrote an article about the mortality rate amongst this same demographic of white, poor, lower educated people killing themselves more, drinking themselves to death, overdosing. That's how bad their economic situation is. And Donald Trump actually speaks to them, not only from an economic message of soft populism, economic populism, but he also strikes that same vein in nationalistic xenophobia, right? He really stirs up everything that pulls that coalition together, everything that triggers them, right? Their latent bigotry or their outright bigotry, not bigotry, their latent bigotry or their outright bigotry, on top of their woes about their economic plight. And now they have a guy and their woes with the political correctness. Now they have Donald Trump, who has a trifecta, right? That's Donald Trump in the nutshell. In a sense, Reich is making a case for Bernie Sanders' attempt to appeal to this base, because sometimes we make a caricature of them and make them seem like they're not real people, and that they are, even if they are real people, then they're troubled people that are just racist. Robert Reich kinds of unpacks that and makes the case for Bernie Sanders to go after them. But in my opinion, you still have to be mindful of that thread of bigotry that's left there. And the question is that I've always posed in this conversation is, can Bernie Sanders strike that? Let me start again. Can these voters relinquish their desire for this racist rhetoric and this racist scapegoating in exchange for an economic paradigm that would be beneficial for them? In other words, can they, the question, what's the matter with Kansas? Can they get over their religious objections to gay marriage? Can they get over their fear of all things Muslim? Can they get over their disdain for migrant workers and immigrants? And can they get over their disdain for Black Lives Matter? If they can do all that, then Robert Reich has made a great case for a lot of people never voting with the Democratic establishment, but possibly voting with Bernie Sanders. I think it's a tall order. I'll leave that for you to decide for yourself. Caller, you're my last call of the night. What's your name?